A Flash in the Dark, Chapter 26. Face the Past. Barry watched as Tony leapt to his feet inside his new cell in the pipeline. He banged on the glass plating, demanding to know where he was. She stayed back, her mask still in place. "You're somewhere you can't hurt anyone again," she said, vibrating her voice. She did not want Tony to recognize her. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Someone who was changed the same way you were. But you chose to hurt people," she admonished. Tony slammed his metal fist into the front of the cell. "You're going to be in here a long time, Woodward," she said, turning away from the cell as Tony raged. The door closed behind her. "That had to feel good," Cisco teased. Barry smiled at her friend and nodded. "Almost as good as proving me wrong about the supersonic punch?" Caitlin asked as they began to walk away from the pipeline. "No, actually, that hurt. I'm pretty sure my hand is broken," Barry said, shaking her head, holding her wrist gingerly. Caitlin handed Cisco her tablet and took Barry's hand carefully in her own. She felt the bones carefully and nodded. "You've got a few fractures. Nothing a few hours in a brace won't fix, at least for you." "I want to get an x-ray, though, just in case," Caitlin said, shaking her head. Barry nodded and followed Caitlin out of the pipeline. Cisco was close behind them. "He's gonna be super disappointed when he finds out you're the only person that visits the pipeline," Cisco said, walking close behind the ladies. Barry nodded. "Why do you come down here so often? I mean, you're down here at least 3 times a week," Caitlin said, carefully peeling off Barry's glove and handing it to Cisco. Barry shrugged slightly. "Well, they are still people, meta or not, and people need interaction. I've been thinking about going for a psychology degree now that I can read a 300-page textbook in under 5 minutes," Barry explained. Caitlin nodded slightly. "Makes sense. We're gonna have to test to see how much you retain of your speed reading before you do, just in case. And as you work full-time too, may I suggest online school?" Caitlin suggested. Barry laughed as Cisco nodded. "What I want to know is, whose childhood nemesis are we going after next? Mine or Caitlin's?" Cisco asked. Caitlin laughed at him as she led Barry to the x-ray. Iris was cleaning up at Jitters when the bell over the door rang. She turned, expecting to see a woman in red, but instead there stood her sister in plain brown slacks and a black button-up. She waved. Iris noticed her right hand was wrapped in a black brace. "Hey," Barry said, a small grin on her face. Iris set down the spray bottle in her hand. "What are you doing here?" Iris asked. Barry ran her hand through her hair. "Joe told me what happened." "How's the hand?" Barry asked. Iris grinned slightly, rubbing her own wrapped hand. "Not broken. So that's good. What happened to yours?" Iris gestured to the brace. Barry grinned down at her hand. She couldn't tell Iris that it was the same thing that had happened to her, so she skewed the truth again. She hated lying to her sister. "Eddie's been helping me with my lack of defensive skills, just in case. I do seem to be a trouble magnet these days. I bent my wrist the wrong way when I punched the bag. Caitlin says it'll be fine by tomorrow, though. Eddie's a good guy. I'm glad you've got him, and he's lucky to have you," Barry explained. There was an awkward pause, then the two of them spoke at the same time. "I'm sorry," they said in unison. There was a less awkward pause, and they both laughed. Iris opened her arms, and Barry hugged her sister. "Forgive me?" Barry asked, looking up at her sister. Iris was only a few inches taller than Barry, but Barry would never live down those few inches. "Always," Iris grinned. "Good. After I heard that Tony took you, I don't know what I'd do without you, Iris. You're my best friend." Barry hugged her sister tighter. "You're my best friend too, Barry," Iris admitted. Barry pulled back and smiled. "Want to hang out and catch up?" She asked, motioning to the chair in front of the table she'd been working on moments before. Barry nodded and sat. "I promise I won't talk about the streak." Barry shook her head at her sister's words. "No, talk about whatever you want. I know it's important to you," Barry said, taking a seat. Iris grinned at Barry. Good, because it's not just the streak. There are others out there just like her. I've gotten scattered posts about this guy that's on fire, except he doesn't burn up. Iris admitted with a grin. Barry chuckled at her sister's words. So you're trying to find the Burning Man now? She asked. Iris nodded emphatically. Why not? A lot can happen in a week, especially with the streak around. I've been trying to get answers from her. Where does she come from? How does she do what she does? But she dodges everything, literally, with this super speed power. When she moves, you don't even see her. She comes and goes in a blink of an eye. Iris struggled for a word. Barry leaned forward and finished her sister's sentence. Flash? Iris nodded, looking thoughtful. Yeah, in a flash. Meanwhile, in Starling City, Oliver Queen was having a bit of a dilemma. After everything that had happened, he really wasn't sure what to do. After Carrie Cutter and her obsession with the arrow, he was starting to realize that his love life was quite a bit more fucked up than he'd thought. He'd spent so much time trying to focus on crime instead that now he couldn't help but think about it. There had been Laurel, with whom it hadn't ended well after he supposedly got her sister killed. He couldn't deny that there was still affection there on both sides, though since Tommy's untimely death, neither of them had spoken about anything that might linger between them. Then there had been Sarah. The Black Canary had been a good match for the arrow. Her death was still a fresh wound in everyone's hearts. There had been a brief fling with Felicity. Then there was Barry. Sweet, amazing Barry Allen, the fastest woman alive. He couldn't deny it. She was fantastic. He and Sarah had had a long discussion about the possibility of an open relationship, and the first person he'd thought of was Barry. Sarah had brought it up. She'd never been good at staying put. Then again, neither had he. His original relationship with her was proof of that. On top of all of this, there was the problem that Queen Consolidated had been snatched out from under him by the unfailingly charming and nerdy Ray Palmer, who was also in the process of snatching Felicity off the market. He himself was living in a small loft apartment in downtown Starling City now, having sold the Queen Mansion. Too many bad memories. He sighed as he looked out on the city from his balcony. He almost wished he saw a flash of lightning heading his way. It would mean someone he could talk to, but he needed to deal with his own problems. He'd been following the news in Central. Barry had her own issues. He was a regular on Iris's blog, just to keep an eye on things. He turned and walked back into his apartment. He hadn't spoken to Barry since they had decided it would be better for both of them if they didn't see each other romantically anymore. He wasn't sure he could look her in the face and keep his promise to himself to stay away from her. Though she had been pulled into this life regardless of his wishes, Central was still a much safer place than Starling, objectively. Looking down at the evidence bag on his coffee table, though, he thought that maybe it wouldn't hurt to see her again, though in his heart he knew it would, especially if she'd moved on. Felicity had mentioned a brief fling with someone, but wouldn't say who. He picked up the bagged boomerang and glared at it, like it would answer all his questions, but it remained silent as the grave in his apartment.